Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Il'gynoth, Heart of Destruction in the Emerald Nightmare.
Although officially known now as Evil Tree.
Yes, 100%. Evil Tree's way better.
So this is an encounter where you just have to deal with ads the entire time until you smash open an eyeball, go inside and start attacking a tumour.
Now you can't kill this eye by normal means, so what you have to do is deal with it another way, which we'll get to in a moment. Now what the eye itself will do is just constantly send out beams at random targets. This beam is completely unavoidable and it does deal a fair amount of damage. It'll knock you down to about 60% health for a non-tank player. Now the problem with this beam is that it is just RNG who it hits, and there is a chance that it will just constantly slam into the same person over and over again. We've had it once before where it hit the same person 4 times in a row, so that's a hell of a lot of damage. In order to counter this, you just need to be shit hot on your spot healing. What you can actually do is focus on the boss and see who it's going to cast on and pre-heal it. If you've got a huge raid group, like a really large sized raid group, you can just have one healer dedicated to that job. You can completely mitigate this ability. You'll also notice 2 Dominator Tentacles either side of the eye. Now these Dominator Tentacles need to be tanked and they will do a fair amount of damage to your tank, unfortunately, due to an ability called Nightmarish Fury. This just deals a barrage of damage to your tank over 6 seconds, and on heroic difficulty and higher, this ability will also increase its own physical damage dealt by 4%, and it stacks up very quickly, and your poor tank, if the ad is left alone for a long period of time, will get absolutely annihilated by this tentacle, so make sure you are focusing it down. On top of this, it will also do an ability called Ground Slam. This is a casted shockwave towards a single player, and this is normally a melee DPS, which will deal some damage to them and knock them up. As soon as the cast starts on you, you want to face it away from as many people as possible, and people should deliberately try and move out of the way of you just to avoid taking the damage. Then once you finish off these Dominator Tentacles, you'll notice that a bunch of these blob nightmarish ichor spawn out of them. You do not want to kill these yet. What you want to do is kite them around and just not let them melee hit you. If they do get a melee hit off on you, it doesn't do a lot of damage, but it leaves a really hard hitting dot on you, and if that ramps up, your healers are not going to like you. They can dispel you, but it's just generally better not to take the damage in the first place. These ads can be slowed, even though they're really slow anyway. They can be knocked back, they can be stunned, they can be vortex, they can be pushed back, they can be gripped. Pretty much anything apart from sheeping them will work. So just try out what you have just to keep them away from you and kite them around for now.
After these Dominator Tentacles have been killed off, you'll get a single Deathglare Tentacle spawn. These tentacles are nowhere near as painful as the previous. All they'll do is just spam Mind Flay. This does do a lot of damage to a single target, however it is interruptible. So just spam your interrupts and make sure that it never gets a successful cast off. When this tentacle dies, it will also spawn some blobs. And it's at this point, you then want to clump all the blobs underneath the eye. You should have 10 at this point, and just AoE the living shit out of them and make sure they all die at the exact same time right underneath the eye. As the blobs start dying off, they'll start to explode, and these explosions deal direct damage to the eye, and you're going to need 20 of them in total to actually gain access to the blobby tumour inside. Do note though that when they do explode, they also deal damage to players, and if you're going to have 10 of them explode at the same time, you are going to be one shot, so make sure that as they're exploding, you get the hell away from them. As soon as you manage to do that, you'll have a nightmare horror pop up. Now this guy will spawn large puddles underneath him, so it's incredibly important that you tank him away from the raid. You want to try and keep this middle area in front of the eye clear as much as you possibly can, but most importantly, this guy will cast Eye of Fate. This is a gigantic beam that will go straight towards your tank that has threat and deal a very large amount of damage. It will also deal damage to anyone that is stood inside the animation. On top of that, it also applies a debuff that increases the amount of damage you take from this ability by 50%. So you're probably thinking, okay, we'll just taunt on 1. Unfortunately, he does this ability so often, you can't taunt on 1, instead you're forced to taunt on 2. When the second beam is going to hit you, because you already have a debuff, it's very important that you use a cooldown as a tank, otherwise you are getting very close to one-hit territory. Now while this Nightmare Horror is up, you only have a couple of seconds to deal some significant damage to him before you immediately have to swap to 2 new tentacles that spawn called the Corruptor Tentacles. Now these tentacles just spam an ability called Spew Corruption, which is a really nasty dot that is applied to random people in your raid. Now if you've received this dot, you're also going to be spawning puddles underneath your feet, so as a player with Spewing Corruption, it's very important that you move out your raid and just run around and make sure all these puddles are nowhere near the rest of your raid team. And healers, swap to these targets and bitch heal them. Use personal cooldowns, use external cooldowns on them. Don't be scared to use things in this encounter because you don't really need them for any other point. And because of how nasty these debuffs are, this is the reason why all DPS needs to swap to them immediately. They are always priority number 1, regardless of what is going on in the encounter.
Now, shortly after these Corruptor Tentacles have actually spawned, they'll also be accompanied by 2 Deathglare Tentacles, which are the Mind Flay Tentacles. Once again, interrupt them, kill them off, and now you have a bunch of blobs. You then want to gather all of these blobs up and do the same thing that you did before. Gather them up, CC them, and kill them off underneath the eye. After this, you then want to switch to the horror that's kind of just been sat at the side of the room from earlier, and you want to finish him off. Generally speaking, if you can move him over to the eye to kill him, because he's about to spawn blobs as well, if you can move him over to the eye and kill him there, it makes it so the blobs are already there and it makes it a hell of a lot easier. But you've got to be very, very careful when moving this guy because of his eye beam ability. If that eye beam ability hits pretty much any DPS, it isn't surprising that they'll just get one shot, especially if something else is happening at the same time. So be very, very mindful of the eye beam timer when you do decide to move this guy. Now, when you kill the horror and you kill off the blobs left over by him, this is enough to kill off the eye and gain access to the tree. However, if you are a little bit slow in doing this, you may have one single Deathglare tentacle spawn. Do kill him off before you go inside. Also, if you happen to have any of the little Nightmare Ica blobs left over at this point, you cannot let them enter the tree. You have to kill them off before they go inside. If they do go inside, they'll instantly go immune, run into the middle of the tree, and then explode, dealing a ton of damage to the raid. And if a bunch of these are going off, as well as the tree's mechanics going off at the exact same time, people are going to get wombo comboed and people are going to die. Do not let them enter the tree.
Now, providing you've transitioned correctly and everything's looking clean, you now have 50 seconds to do as much damage as you possibly can to the tumor inside. If you can get the boss to under 60% health during this 50-second window, you're looking A-OK on DPS and you don't have to worry about it. If you're way above 60%, you might want to look at using Bloodlust. We really wouldn't recommend doing it because Bloodlust is so much more useful later on in the encounter when you're outside the tree. Now, while you are inside, you don't just get to sit there and nuke the boss. The boss will be throwing out some debuffs on random players. These debuffs just do ticking damage to you, and 8 seconds later you explode and deal damage to anyone within the targeting circle around you. So as soon as you get these debuffs, you need to make sure that you move to the edges of the room and make sure that you're not stood on top of each other. That way only you take damage from your debuff, and then you can go straight back towards the boss and continue doing the damage you was doing. Healers, make sure you spot heal these targets. Again, if you have any healer cooldowns left over, you could use them here, I guess, if you want to use like output cooldowns like Trank, Healing Tide, Revival, etc. This isn't a bad time to use them at all. There's no other point really to use them. Everyone else at this point, you should just be stood really close to the boss, but make sure you don't go right inside him because you will be thrown backwards and potentially you could land inside one of the targeting circles from someone that has a debuff. Now, when the boss's cast has roughly 7 to 6 seconds left on it, it's incredibly important that you think about leaving the room. As soon as that cast is over, everyone inside gets sealed inside and they just instantly die. So make sure that you leave before the cast is over.
Once you're outside, the eye will reseal behind you, and you'll now have to do the same thing over again. Gather 20 blobs, blow them up under the boss. However, this second sort of first phase that you're doing again is way more challenging than the first time that you did it.
2 Destructor Tentacles will spawn. What you'll need to do, like you did with the first pair, is have one of your tanks go on one and one of your tanks go on the other. Now, unlike the first pair of Destructor Tentacles, you don't have all the time in the world to kill these ones off. So instead, we'd recommend, especially right at the start of the expansion where you don't have fantastic gear, that you focus down one and leave the other one up. Because it's at this point, you'll then have 2 Deathglare Tentacles spawn right near where the eye is. You then need to start killing them. And then immediately after that, you'll have 3 spewing Corruptor Tentacles right round on the right-hand side. And you'll need to immediately go to them. While you're fighting with all these other tentacles, you're going to have 1 Destructor Tentacle left up on 1 tank for a very, very long period of time. It's really important that you make this your strongest gear tank and you make sure that he has cooldowns available while you're off dealing with all these other tentacles. As soon as you've got those 3 spewing Corruptor Tentacles down, as well as the other 2 Deathglare Tentacles down, that's when you immediately want to go back, save that tank's life, hope that he's not on the ground dead, and then you can continue off for the rest of the encounter.
Now, because this series of events is like so tight on your raid, this might be one of the opportunities where you might want to use Bloodlust. If you get to this point over and over again and you keep failing at it, just use Bloodlust here. Why not? So at this point, after you've saved your tank from the Dominator Tentacle, that you will have a ton of these blobs up, you then want to gather them underneath the eye, AoE them all down, CC them, Vortex them, Mass Grip them, stun them, make sure they all explode under the eye, and then you can take a very brief sigh of relief as then a new Nightmare Horror ad spawns.
Deal with this Nightmare Horror the exact same way you did with the first one. Deal some damage to it while there's nothing up. However, you will have 2 Mind Flayers spawn almost immediately after he does. Swap onto them and then be ready to move to the far left hand side of the boss. This is when you'll get 2 Corruptor Tentacles spawn, nuke these guys off, and then you can go back to the horror. And it's at this point where you're looking to go back into the tree for the second and final time. Clump all the yads up, AoE them down, and get ready to go in the tree. However, if you're a little bit slow at killing these blobs, you'll get 4 Corruptor Tentacles spawn all at the exact same time, right in front of the eye. So it's not too bad because you're already there and you can just immediately start to AoE them down. It is, however, 4 Corruptor Tentacles. If they all get a cast off, that's 4 debuffs. We already said those debuffs fucking hurt. If they all go out, it's not surprising if someone dies, especially if you're in a smaller raid size. So just look at nuking them down as soon as you possibly can. Go inside the tree, and you will be in there for the last time. Is at this point you want to use absolutely everything else that you've got left in your arsenal when it comes down to DPS cooldowns or healing cooldowns, because once this phase is over, he's dead or you're dead, because he will just flat out one-shot everyone regardless if they're inside the tree or outside the tree when the cast finishes. And that's the fight. That's all there is to it. So it's just, again, it's all about ad control and knowing exactly when things spawn at what time and knowing exactly when to blow up the bloods.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that this particular strat that we've kind of walked you through, you might want to make your own adjustments to it depending on your DPS. You might have exceptionally good DPS at some points and then DPS is weaker at other points. I think Bloodlust usage is going to be the main way of changing up the strat, but you might find a point where we want to kite the bloods for longer. That just works for us. Well, then do it. Just do whatever works for you the best. Definitely don't be scared to do some experiments with it, because you can do some crazy stuff.
So thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide helps you out at all, then please do slap a like on it. It helps us out so much. And before we let you go, check out our sponsor, Discord. Discord allows you to make your very own voice comm server for you and your friends in your guild for free. You don't have to keep paying for all those expensive TeamSpeak and Ventrilo servers. We have our own Discord server set up where you can talk with like-minded people, whether you're going to be talking about FatBoss shit or raids or something. We hang out on the server as well, so maybe you can just chat with us. And the link for all of this is in the description. And also a big shout out to all of our Patreon peeps. You keep us in this business and we love you for it. And we shall see you all in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.